Okay, hello everyone. We're going to be working today with the Road to Revolution. This is an introduction for you to be able then to go on with the reading. So let us begin. The big question for today is, why did the colonies end up breaking the bonds with Britain? Yes, remember we've said that so far the relationship between the colonies and the mother country was a very good one. The status quo was a period of prosperity for both sides. Everybody felt English. The colonies were English subjects too. They felt British. And there was a high degree of self-government. When we talked about salutary neglect, we mentioned that the triangular trade worked very well because also all the regulations that Britain imposed on the colonies were just regulations for trade. It was taxation, yes, duties, but to regulate trade. And there was a lot of smuggling at the time. This is the idea of that England would turn a blind eye, as we said, when it came to controlling everything, because the colonies were giving a lot of revenue to Britain. So it was a win-win situation for everyone. Now, we are going to ask ourselves why 1763 is a turning point, right? Why, after this date, things started to change. This relationship started to change. So let's go back a little bit in time, right? You know that, well, during the 1600s and the 1700s, especially the 1700s, France and England had different wars. Both of them were becoming very important nations in Europe, as well as very important nations holding territories overseas, colonies. There were many of these wars. We're going to focus on the last one, the one that, if you studied English history too, you may know as the 7 Years' War, right? Which entailed these two nations, and it is known as the first global war. Why? Because of the amount of colonies both sides had, it was fought in many places in the world. For our subject, we are interested in what happened here in North America. Also, the interesting thing about the 7 Years' War is that it was started because of a conflict between the colonists, the French and the British colonists in North America, right? Remember that the map we've seen, I showed you the first class, where remember that North America was had been conquered. Most of North America was claimed, let's say, by the British on the eastern seaboard, the Spanish on the southwest, and the French in the north, what we know now as Canada, and all along the Mississippi River. So the conflict was present there, and it started in the colonies, but then it became a global war between the two countries. Here in North America, the war was known as the French and Indian War. Why? Because the British were fighting the French, and the Indians and the Native Americans took sides. They were always playing the big powers off to get some negotiation power. It was very useful for the Native Americans to have two powers fighting for supremacy. And well, this time they chose the French side. There is a video that connected to this particular war that will be posted here on the same post if you want to go deeper into this, the French and Indian War. But so far, to understand the Road to Revolution, it is suffice to say that the natives sided with the French, which was not a very good idea, or perhaps not a good choice in the end, because France lost. Right, so for you to have an idea, here on the left, we can see the boundaries, yeah, between the claim boundaries between the big European nations before the war, and 1763 after the war. What we see here in purple is a lot of land acquired, yes, by the British. So the British won the war. They won territories, of course, in many places of the world, and here, particularly in North America, there was a lot of land. This is the moment when the French left the continent for good, and Canada, present Canada and present US is definitely in the hands of Britain. But we must remember, and even today in Canada, we have the two languages as official languages. Now, notice that here you have the American colonies on the eastern seaboard. They have gone west quite a lot, pushing the frontier, as we always say, but the amount of land goes up to the Mississippi River. Notice all the land that was acquired by Britain, and of course this was a great opportunity for the colonies to also go on expanding. Remember that land was very important. Do remember that as much as the big powers would claim these lands as theirs, this was not empty land. Of course, Native Americans lived there with more or less power depending on the areas. So, to put it in a nutshell, by the end of the French and Indian War, 1763, we have the North American colonies quite happy because they have more land. France is out, right? So no more skirmishes and battles with the French or fight for trade. And the Indians, called the negotiating power was weakened. They have always been able to play off the powers once against the other and choose side and be able to negotiate. But now they are left with one big power, which is Britain. So this is a drawback for the Native Americans. But for the colonies, all this is good news, great news. While in Britain, and this is what I want you to pay attention to, the people in Britain were going, because of the amount of the war, the war effort was such that they were going through a financial crisis, right? This is right after the 7 Years' War, as they called it, Britain was in a very difficult financial position, yeah? And a very difficult economic crisis. This, together with the fact that the new king, George III, he was a Hanoverian. Hanoverians were generally not that prone to intrude into the ruling of the country, but George III in particular came to the throne with the idea of asserting the power of the monarchy. These two elements will start making the relationship more and more difficult. So there's a change in Britain's approach to their relationship with the colonies, especially with these very prosperous colonies. We said already, and we know which were the sources of income of the colonies. So they started limiting the power of the colonies and trying to extract more money from them. The first such measure, and the one that I need you to remember as not the turning point, but kind of the beginning of the tension, is how to limit the power of the colonies. Well, the proclamation line of 1763, the proclamation this is not a law, but it's a document issued by the king, by Roy. It's a royal document, by which the king said that colonies could not move west of the Appalachians. I repeated west there, sorry. The Appalachians are these mountains which here on this line, you have the Appalachians, and that was taken. Theoretically, the aim of this proclamation, and the line was called the Proclamation Line, was to protect colonies from Indian rampages, which, by the way, there had been, after the French left, well, the Indians had been attacking the colonies. And so, but the king took this as an excuse to impose this limit to the expansion of the colonists, saying that the land, the main idea here was to limit the colonists. They were becoming too powerful, they were becoming too prosperous, they were becoming too autonomous. So with this line, with the excuse of protecting them, the colonists, the monarchy was making sure that these guys were not going to be too powerful. So how would you have felt if you had been a colonist? This is a question I posed, but also remember that there were lots of interest, especially powerful men of all the elites had already moved towards those lands, pushing the frontier, fighting the Indians. So there was a lot of interest on those lands. So this enraged the colonists to a very high extent. The next point, remember we mentioned 2 points: limiting the power of the colonies. This is what Britain wanted. And then the idea of, okay, let's make these people who got so many advantages from the war, these people will be the colonists. So the British would say, okay, let's make them pay more, help us with to solve our crisis. So the idea of taxation for revenue is the idea that I would like you to focus on in your readings. Remember that so far taxation existed, of course, but for regulating trade. Remember we mentioned the Navigation Acts. Yes, these laws that would just help or make people, or merchants and traders, to forcefully go through London and through England. All the raw material from the colonies should go to England and then to the Europe. That was accepted. Those were the Navigation Acts that have been in place during all of the colonial times. Navigation Acts that also entailed the fact that, well, products would only come and go in British ships, and then certain goods that had duties on them, but that was accepted by the colonists because this was taxation for regulating trade. Now, what England would impose now is taxation for revenue. Like, if this is a tax only to get money, right? Which you can think of examples in our reality, when taxes that are really just to get money out of the citizens. This is accepted or not. So when it goes out of control, well, people react. And we know that in the USA, the idea of how much you tax and who taxes you is a whole issue, and it comes from this particular period. So look at the number of, I'm going to show you all these acts that you see appearing there. These are acts. Whenever we say acts, are laws passed by the Parliament back in London, in Westminster. So there are lots that you're going to be reading about them, and this is what I want you to do. For next time, you are going to be reading some fragment from the chapter connected to the road to revolution. You will read several acts, and we have prepared for you a chart for you to complete, yeah? So that, what do we want you to do as you read? To try and make sense of all this information. So you will have the acts, like the strength, the tightening of the reins from the point of view from Britain's side, and the reaction. The second column would be the reaction of the colonies. so that you can see the escalation of conflict, how each of the acts would tackle a certain aspect, and then in the colonies, first we will have some protest, then some legal claims from the point of view of the colonists, and then some riots, and then something else. And I need you to take a look at that curve, the line that goes from just discomfort and dissatisfaction to resistance, only to resistance. You will see that by the end of the chapter, things are getting really problematic, but not at the beginning. At the beginning, nobody dreamt of, in the colonies, nobody was dreaming of becoming independent. So this is the objective for next class. Try to read, complete this handout that is posted. It's attached here in this post, but not for details. Please do not get entangled into details, right? Just what the act said, okay? Example, well, the Sugar Act was a taxation on certain products, this and that, and what happened in the colonies, which was the reaction of the colonies, and always taking into account this big question of why did the colonies get more and more resistant to this. And as many historians have posed, what would have happened if Britain had been more flexible? Because that perhaps if they had given up some of their claims, well, Britain wouldn't have lost their most prosperous colonies. So this is it for today. I hope that you find the reading pleasant. Again, do not focus on details, but the process. And the process is escalation of conflict from just this discontent to total resistance, and then many people, or some people, started to think about breaking the ties with Britain. Well, have a wonderful week. See you next class.